Welcome everyone to our next installment of our Nuts and Bolts training series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Kovatz. I am the Executive Director of the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association. And tonight we have a important training session, not just for our newly elected and currently elected officials, but for our county chairs, our activists and volunteers in every county. And that is the upcoming redistricting process and what role our county parties are going to be playing in that process. Before I bring in our trainers, I just want to cover some ground rules real quick. We're going to be here for about an hour, so everyone kind of settle in. We ask that everyone be respectful of each other as we're going through the training. Be present. So if you have to get up, go grab a glass of water, go to the restroom, so be it. But while you're here, turn your phone off. You can answer the emails afterwards, respond to the text later. And the next one, make sure you're asking a lot of questions. Redistricting is a process that comes up every 10 years. Not a lot of people know a lot about it. That's why we brought in some experts. So make sure you're asking as many questions as we can. Everyone's going to be muted throughout the chat or throughout the presentation. So please put your questions in the chat. And then as we get to a break or at the end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and ask those questions as we're going. So as we get started here, we've got a lot of people who are already signed in. Let's go ahead, check in. Where are you from in the state? If you're an elected official or a county chair, what office do you hold? Go ahead, put your answers in the chat. And as that's going on, I'm going to introduce our president, the chair of the McHenry County Dems, Christina Zahorak, to get us going here.
Thank you, Dan. And as Dad said, I'm Christina Zahorak, president of the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association. And I just wanted to say that the investment that the IDCCA is making into our county representative mapping is the biggest investment I think we've ever made on this really incredibly important issue. And I'm very glad to see all of you here tonight. There's some friendly faces. Hey, Julie, nice to see you. And I think it's really important that the more that we learn about what this representative mapping is about, I think the more that you all are going to want to invest in it too. And I hope that not only will I see you here on this call tonight, but I'll see you again on Monday night, which is our annual Party Builder Award fundraiser. And I'm sure all of you know because you've gotten the emails, but we're honoring our new Illinois General Assembly leadership, and that's President Don Harmon and Speaker Chris Welch. And I think, as Dan mentioned, most of us are probably kind of familiar with every 10 years we get the census done, and we have the remapping of the congressional districts, and we have the remapping of the Illinois House and the Senate seats based on the census data, right? Well, this mapping occurs at the same time at the county level. And it's often been left up to those who don't really or may not have any interest in representative mapping. And some have asked me why we at the IDCCA, a partisan organization, is concerned and are taking this issue on. But I would argue to you, as Democrats, we always fight for fairness and equality. And I also think that as Democrats, we're interested in ensuring that the maps are representative and will stand up in court using the Voting Rights Act and population distribution. And not every county has a democratically controlled board or the resources to create a representative map. And while they certainly don't have the resources either to challenge a map if it isn't representative. And creating these types of maps are an investment over, as I said, the next 10 years that are going to ensure policies that get enacted that reflect our values. And we all know that the policies that get enacted at the county or municipal level affect our day-to-day lives, right? And finally, should the county boards not pass the maps within the prescribed timing, which is in July, the responsibility is going to fall to a commission created in every county that includes the Democratic County Chair. And again, our counties don't have the resources beyond this effort to really be prepared to defend or to fight for representative maps. So we can't do any of this without raising the funds to hire the experts like the Honorable Josina Morita, who's here tonight, an urban planner and the person who worked on remapping at the state level 10 years ago, and our good friend, political strategist, Zach Kautsky. So I turn it over to them to give you even more of an in-depth detail about why this is such an important issue. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, President Zohoreck. Zach Kautsky, good to see so many friends, even if just virtually. Hope everyone's staying healthy and safe. But it's an honor to join you tonight and to see some of you again in discussing this very important topic. I'm going to kind of just level set us, and then the expert mapper, Josina Morita, Commissioner Morita, will take over. But why we initially came to the chairs with this proposal is the realization that in a state like Illinois that has otherwise seen voters almost universally align themselves with the Democratic Party at the federal, statewide, and sorry, somebody muted me there. Sorry about that. Here, I'll just briefly say, for those of you that are wondering kind of why we brought this to the Chairs Association, in a state that otherwise has been almost entirely aligned with the Democratic Party and our policies from the federal, statewide, General Assembly, and increasingly down to the local level. I know many of you are probably working on local elections here that'll be on April 6th. One of the last vestiges of Republican power and control in this state are at the county and township level. And fortunately, Democrats are in a position in counties large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and increasingly even exurban, to be able to draw maps for the first time, in some cases, history, and in other times to do so with the knowledge and experience that certainly myself and Josina can provide to you. And you may be thinking, well, why counties? You don't usually think about what's going on at your courthouse, although admittedly some of you here on this call probably are the outliers in that regard. But why counties? And it's pretty simple. For those of you that serve on a county board, you know the influence that you have on things that people may not even realize. But for Democratic Party policies and principles, counties have an incredible amount of influence and policymaking authority down to the local level. Most notably, we've seen with the pandemic with regards to county healthcare departments being really the front of the line here to make sure that we are administering the vaccines, but even prior to that, testing and education and guidance about how to beat and bend the curve of this horrific pandemic. But even when it's not a worldwide pandemic, they provide regular healthcare services, really is oftentimes kind of a last option and a social safety net there on that. There's also a huge component oftentimes too with regards to privatization of public resources. Many counties run nursing homes, and when private entities take that over, the level of support that they may be providing at the cost for the taxpayers often can be on the chopping block. Our brothers and sisters in organized labor have not only workforces employed by counties, but they have contracts for both vendors and services, but that they also then rely on counties to ensure that prevailing wages are put out in a timely manner and enforced at a local level, meaning that union tradesmen and women are able to bring home more money for their families and keep local taxpayer dollars within the local economy on that. Not to mention when the county themselves is initiating contracts for capital construction or just, again, service and maintenance to make sure that there's responsible bidder ordinances on the books and enforced so that, again, our taxpayers are tax dollars are staying local and supporting families within the community at good living wages and benefits. Criminal justice, that's been a huge topic of focus as of late. Each county has a sheriff, they run a jail, they police millions of people in unincorporated areas, they have their own court systems, and they have state's attorneys who are the prosecutors, and they also have public defenders. So how the county themselves are actually administering the justice oftentimes is the most impactful, kind of even regardless of what a state or federal criminal justice reform, while well overdue, is happening. And those local officials and the budgets that then those boards are approving have significant impact on communities in every corner of our state. Lastly, just environment and economic development, increasingly downstate environmental zoning allowances for both community solar, large-scale solar farms and wind farms are at the county level. And if those are oftentimes too onerous, we're not seeing that green economy, spread throughout the state. And again, usually employ tradesmen and women at good jobs in helping us transition from the current energy economy that we have to a clean and green economy, again, that can support families across the state. But also, many times counties themselves have forest preserves or protected lands that they're required to oversee. They also have some level of control and oversight for drainage districts or sanitary or sewer districts, and the equity that comes into that. Same thing could be said for when, where, and how waste transfer sites or landfills are being approved and allowed to operate. That has a lot of equity component, both for the local landowners and oftentimes the communities that facility, that type of service will present themselves. Both down, scale on the lower income level and certainly in the majority minority. And lastly, economic development, maintenance of county run and overseen roads, bridges, and infrastructure is a huge component for attracting good, high-paying jobs and making sure that we have a safe and well-maintained infrastructure on that end. But also, oftentimes, county boards will approve tax breaks or tax abatements or incentives to companies that are looking to expand or relocate there. And same thing with regards to public housing and affordable housing on that end. So when you kind of go down the line of the things that we as Democrats care about, that we fight for at the state and federal level, and that we know ultimately serves best are the communities that we live in and the constituents that we're proud to represent, counties have an incredible reach into that type of policy making. And when we are able to be in control of those county boards and ultimately ensure that these maps are both legal and fair, that representation and that policy outcome then goes more in our direction. So without further ado, my partner, Commissioner Josina Morita.
Thanks, Zach. Hi, everybody. I'm gonna get my screen shared here. So my name is Josina Morita. I'm a commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District here in Cook County, and chair of the statewide Asian American Caucus. But in my past life, 10 years ago, I was the voting rights mapper, largely for the community organizations working on the state map. So this is some of my kind of past expertise and experience that I'm bringing to the redistricting process this time, and hoping to support you all and your map processes. Because like Zach said, I think, right, we have seen tremendous progress in terms of democratic progress at the state level. We have been underperforming at the county and local level, and a lot of that has to do with who has drawn the map in the past and what kind of maps were drawn. I don't think I have to tell you all how important the county districts and the county boards are in not just the policy issues that Zach talked about, but how the political pipeline grows, right? So if we don't have the kind of map that can elect Democrats at the county level, we don't have the political ladder that we need to continue to build our bench and move people up and build, more Democratic officials across the board. And redistricting is one of the unique times every 10 years where we get to redraw our political districts, which completely changes what is possible over the next 10 years. And, redistricting happens every 10 years right after the census year. So that's what's happening this year. And to understand that redistricting is really fundamentally about power. It is the redrawing of political districts. And when you redraw these districts, you are determining who lives in a district, including incumbents, potential candidates, institutions, voters, and residents, which determines who can be elected in a district, right? All of us who've worked on campaigns, you can look at a map, look at a district and know, is this a winnable district, a target district, a swing district, or is this just not a winnable district? This is where we are changing the game, right? When we redraw these lines, we are changing what is going to be possible over the next 10 years. So you think about as much time and resources that you put into winning specific campaigns is how much time and resources should we be putting into changing the formula of what's possible now that's going to last for the next 10 years. And that will, like Zach talked about, determine what kind of policy issues are possible, affecting the lives of everybody in your respective communities. So what we do or we don't do in the next year through this redistricting process will determine what is possible for the next 10 years. So I give the example, 10 years ago, I helped draw the voting rights districts, which included 4 Asian American influence districts in the General Assembly map. Throughout the entire history of the state of Illinois, until 5 years ago, we had 0 Asian Americans in the General Assembly. 10 years ago, when we drew the map and we drew 4 districts that were at least 20% Asian, which became viable districts for Asian American candidates. And we now have 5 Asian Americans in the General Assembly. I mean, it's a complete game changer. We went from 0 ever in the history of Illinois to now 5 in the General Assembly. I chair a caucus of 9. This is what I mean by like a complete game changer, and what redistricting can do and how it can last for the next years. The same way we've been able to build Asian American political power off the map, you all thinking about how do you build your own local democratic power through the map. Taking a little bit of a step back, right? Understanding the difference between 2 processes that are happening at the same time, right? So one is political apportionment and the other is state level redistricting. So federal apportionment is when they take the entire Congress and they reallocate how many seats each state gets. And as you all probably know, Illinois is continuing to lose population, and more importantly, lose population in proportion to the rest of the country and other states. And so we have progressively lost a district every 10 years. And it looks like we will lose at least 1, if not 2, this cycle of reapportionment. And that doesn't mean just that we lose a seat in Congress, which is incredibly important, but it also means that we now take the entire state population, and instead of dividing it by 18, we're dividing it by 17. So each congressional district is going to get larger in population, which also then means in order to draw effective Democratic districts, we need more Democrats, which, as you know, in certain parts of the state get harder and harder. So it has a ripple effect, this reapportionment that happens at the federal level. Looking at the map, you can identify your county here. We've seen significant population gains in the collars, slight to significant population loss in significant parts of the state. And so that will also then affect the size of your districts and your county redistricting process and what is and isn't possible. So I know that people oftentimes think of redistricting as this very technical process, right? That it's so technical, there are all these rules, there's only one way to draw a map. What I will explain to you in some ways is the exact opposite, that there are actually very few rules to redistricting, and you can draw a map a gazillion ways. So a lot of you probably have, who've gone through redistricting before, you have a GIS mapper who draws a map and you think that's the one way you can draw a map. I just want to be very clear that there are almost infinite ways that you can draw a map. And the idea that there is only one way to draw a map, or that there is necessarily even one fair way to draw a map, is a bit of a fallacy, right? So just like there's no such thing as objectivity, there is no real such thing as a fair map. Fair to whom, right? So it's all in the eyes of the beholder. What is fair to one person may not be fair to another, right? Is it fair on developing, sometimes people think, 50-50 Republican Democratic districts, that's what fair is. But I think we also know, right, that Illinois is not 50-50% Republican and Democratic, right? So you want to draw a map that is representative to the extent possible, partisan-wise, demographically, other different factors that you may take into account, but how you draw that map really is in your hands for those of you who are actually part of county boards that are drawing the map. And so you, as an elected official, have to take your own judgment on what is the most representative map that represents the people that you serve. And to be frank, right, a map that can maximize Democratic representation in your areas. Because again, as much energy as you all put into specific campaigns to elect Democrats, this is the opportunity to draw districts that are actually winnable for Democrats. So I just want to kind of debunk the idea that there's only one way to draw a map, or that there is even necessarily this idea of a fair map that people like talk about. A lot of what a fair map is that they talk about is focused on process and not the outcome. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is what is the outcome of the map. So going into the rules, and again, a lot of you probably thought if I was going to list off all of the redistricting rules, there'd be like 10 pages of rules. There are 3 fundamental rules to redistricting: equal population, compact and contiguous, and the Federal Voting Rights Act. And I'll go through each of these. So equal population is exactly what it sounds like. It's the fundamentals to one person, one vote. It means that each district should have the same number of people in order for them to have the same equal representation in their respective bodies. So if you had a district with 50 residents and you had a district with 25 residents, the residents in which district have more power? The answer is the district with 25 people. Oftentimes people think more people means more power, but when you're talking about each district only gets one representative, understanding that it's like a pizza. So each representative is a pizza. Well, the people in the district with 50 residents only get 1/50th of a slice of pizza. And the people in a district with 25 people get 1/25th of the pizza. So the people in the district with 25 people actually have twice as much pizza, twice as much say, because they still only get one vote in their respective bodies. The second rule is compact and contiguous, which I think, as you will see when you look at your own maps, when you look at other maps, when you look at this map, it is very vaguely interpreted. Compact, oftentimes people think it means a shape like a circle or a square, something that you're used to seeing. That communities are not shaped like that. And so it is very loosely kind of interpreted. And contiguous, meaning it has to be connected, right? It can't be 2 islands with nothing connecting it. But as you can see in the picture on the right, contiguity can even just mean connected at a point. So when you take these 2 rules into account, simply that you have to draw districts with equal population and that they have to be somewhat compact and connected, you can imagine that there are literally infinite ways that you can draw a map. The third rule, which I think is the most important one and the one that we'll talk about the most today, is the Voting Rights Act. So the federal government recognized and passed a bill in 1965 that there had been racially discriminatory voting practices, including how the maps were drawn. There are many different sections to the Voting Rights Act, but the section that applies to Illinois that's most important is Section 2. And it essentially says that if you can draw an effective majority minority district, you have to, right? So if you can draw a district that is, and the federal standards for an effective majority minority district are generally around 55% African-American and 65% Latino. It's higher than 50% plus 1 because we know that not everybody votes. And it's higher for Latinos because they have a lower median age. So a lot of Latinos can't vote yet. And also because they have lower citizenship rates. So 55% African-American, 65% Latino is the general standard. And again, if you can draw an effective majority minority district, you have to. So to outline those 3 fundamental rules is really to say that there almost are no rules except for race. And I will kind of show an Illinois example later that kind of highlights to what extent that is true. I know political gerrymandering is a term that we like to say a lot, right? Especially those of us who are in politics, we say, oh, that's gerrymandered. Oh, that's gerrymandered. And a lot of us probably think that we know gerrymandering when we see it, right? That you can tell by looking at a district, whether it's gerrymandered because it's a funny shape or something like that. I would actually argue that sometimes districts that are gerrymandered are the ones that look the most compact because, again, communities are not shaped that way. And political gerrymandering is generally hard to prove. And so it's very unusual. While it is technically not legal, it's very, very hard to prove and have a map struck down based off of political gerrymandering. Voting rights is the most common and strongest way to strike down a map. So here's a fun example just for Illinois historians. In 2000, the black line was the map. That black dot there is President Obama's house. But in 2000, he wasn't President Obama. He was a new candidate who ran against incumbent Bobby Rush. And Bobby didn't like it very much. And so in 2002, when they redrew the map with the red lines, you see that they literally drew out the block that President Obama lived on. Totally legal. Some might say that's political gerrymandering, whether it's political gerrymandering, it's totally legal, and that's what happened. Here's another district that, again, somebody might look at just by the shape of it and say that that's gerrymandering. So if you look at this green district down the top and bottom of your screen that says 1704, it's the green district. You looked at that shape, that is definitely not a shape that you have ever seen before. And it's probably a district that you would look at it and say that that is political gerrymandering. But if you look at the underlying data underneath the map, now you see the darker areas are the Latino population. And so you can see what they did is they took the north side and south side Latino population in the city of Chicago and connected it literally with empty roads and made a district. This is Chuy Garcia's district. And you might say, well, why would they take the north side and the south side Latino population? You know why they might do that part, but why would they not connect it just straight down the middle and make it a more compact district? Well, if you look at the underlying data, this is now the darker areas are African-American population. This is Danny Davis's district, and the west side is Chicago. And so the 1704 district, the Latino district, was drawn to create a majority Latino district, our only effective majority Latino voting rights district in Illinois. It was done to respect and protect the existing Black district. So what looked like an incredibly insanely gerrymandered district is actually a voting rights district, and this was upheld as a legitimate voting rights district. So again, to say that there are no rules aside from equal population, compact, and contiguous, except for Race and Voting Rights Act, this is the extent to which we have been able to draw voting rights districts in Illinois. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the extent that you can do this. There are strategies specifically used historically and to this day to dilute the vote of certain populations, both racially, partisan-wise, and otherwise. The two main strategies are called packing and cracking. So packing is if you had a community, an African-American community, say in that blue circle, you could draw 3 65% Black districts. But instead, what they would do to dilute the Black vote is actually pack it into one single 95% African-American district. So instead of having 3 effective Black districts, you would have only 1. This is now illegal under the Voting Rights Act, because again, if you can draw 3 effective majority Black districts, you really are required to. So that is packing. Cracking is basically the opposite. So taking, again, that same African-American community in a blue circle and splitting it across 5 different districts so that it doesn't make up an effective majority in any district. And this is considered cracking. So it is legal, completely legal for the most part, to pack and crack Democrats, right? You don't really have partisan rights in the redistricting process. But it is completely illegal to pack and crack communities of color under the Voting Rights Act. So to reinforce on the left, doing this packing or cracking Democrats is legal, doing the exact same thing to African American or Latino community is illegal. So understanding some of the context of how votes have been diluted, or communities have been diluted or divided in the redistricting process, and then what the rights are, particularly under the Voting Rights Act, to keep communities together. There are kind of two different strategies that we have articulated here for you all, because some of you are in districts or counties that you are in democratic control, and you can draw the map, and you have the ability to kind of look at all of the different factors that you think would make a representative map, and do that on your own. Others of you are in Republican controlled areas, and you really only can play defense on the map. So the offensive strategy would be to look at how to maximize Democratic districts, or I should say to optimize Democratic districts, to respect voting rights, to ensure that where you can draw effective majority minority districts that you are, so you are not in violation of the Voting Rights Act. You can look at growth trends, again, remembering that this map is not just static for this moment in time, but that it lasts for the next 10 years. And so knowing where your populations may be growing, where they may be decreasing, can also help inform how to draw an optimal map that will last the next decade. Knowing where incumbents and targets might be living, which districts, some incumbents may be aging out over the next 10 years, and where you might have opportunities to take a district or take a seat and draw a more competitive district. And of course, also where you just have capacity and infrastructure for your organizing to be able to actually win campaigns. On the defensive side, you want to try to protect your existing Democratic districts, make sure that their map does respect the Voting Rights Act. Again, that is the primary tool that can and usually is used to strike down a map. I always give the example that, to be frank, I'm a Cook County Democrat. I really never talk to Republicans, very much, but every 10 years they're our best friends, because they know in a democratically controlled General Assembly that the only defense that they have against a map is the Voting Rights Act. So every 10 years, I just got a call about a month and a half ago from the Senate Republican redistricting lawyer checking in, because they know that this is the only tool that they have. And it's our only tool when we're on the defense, it's their only tool, but we also know that we have more people of color who are Democrats. And so it's a different kind of tool for us than it is for them. And then of course, while we can't get greedy and do all of the things on the offensive side when we're on the defense and we're in the minority, we can try to identify one or two priority target districts that we think that we could take over time. So those are kind of what we would utilize as strategies. And what Zach and I can help do is provide a voting rights map for you. Like what kind of map is can optimize voting rights in your county. A partisan map, if that is useful, of what is the optimal number of Democratic districts and in your area, and then what we would call kind of an ideal map or a more representative map that kind of marries the two and takes into other local factors that only you all would know from organizing in your local areas that would be important to draw a representative map. So I'll leave it there and just remind you that, again, I know it can be a bit daunting and you may feel a little bit behind the 8 ball in this process, but what you do or don't do in the next year, the next 6 months to a year, really will determine what is possible in your county for the next 10 years. I know you all as chairmen and precinct captains, your job is to build the party in your area. And this is one of the most important opportunities that you will have to do that. So I hope that we can help.
Okay, so we've got some questions that have been coming in. So let me go ahead and add our other presenter back in here and we can get to some of these questions. And so One question that we did get ahead of time, and again, folks, if you have, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them as we're going. But on the precinct lines, who is actually, what jurisdiction does that fall under? Is that the county board? Is that local municipalities? Is that the legislature? We've got a lot of precinct committee people from throughout the state that their lines are going to change. So who has that jurisdiction?
So the fundamental building block of geography is the block, which is a unit that the census draws. And so blocks will change between 2010 and 2020 with population change. And then those blocks are used as building blocks for block groups, and then census tracts and precincts. And then it is usually the election authority, the state board of election, that will redraw the precinct lines based off of the population growth, because they try in general to keep the precincts within a certain population limit.
Okay. If the county is violating any of the standards with how those precincts are made, if they're too large or they're not large enough, how does a county party or just a precinct committee person go about forcing that issue to get their county board or the election authority to comply with that?
I mean, that's when you would need to bring in a legal team. And I know it's something that the Democratic chairs has thought about, how to bring in a legal team to kind of help with this kind of bigger set of technical issues so that you're not necessarily doing them one-off. And so I think that would be up to, you all, how you would bring in a legal team specifically to tackle that issue.
Okay. Is there any legal statutes or any requirements that require a public and transparent process in the redistricting on the county level? We've got a lot of people that are from central and southern Illinois where the Republicans control their county boards and might not have been the most transparent process in the past. Is there anything that they're required to do?
So none of them are required, so the state redistricting is mandated by the Illinois Constitution. But county redistricting, a lot of it is through your own statutes and legislative processes. And so a lot of you can actually, through legislation, define what your process is, how many hearings you're going to have, what kind of public comment that you're going to have, and how the map will be passed. And I think that this is actually leads to an important point about you should need to learn more about what your own local process is, right? Like, so I know we've seen examples where there are counties where it is whoever is the longest sitting county board member that gets to chair the committee and chair the redistricting process. That's by legislation. So in that county, they actually have a Democratic majority. They can change that legislation now and make it so that whoever, the Democratic chair or whoever they want is the one that controls the process. So there are things that you can be doing now to change by legislation your own process, how many hearings you want to have, things like that. Those are things that you can largely influence and set the process now. And so knowing what your own process is, and it's different county by county, there are things that you can be doing now to kind of set up what the process looks like to ensure transparency and public feedback in the process now.
Okay. And we'll put a pin in the one question about the, we know that the state legislature handles drawing the federal, the congressional lines and the state lines, but we've got a question about the census data that I want to end on a little bit later. So let me keep going through these questions here. Once the census data actually and the districts are drawn, does it affect any of how the polling places, the number of polling places that are within a district or within a county? Is that something that is up to the county clerks to decide? And is there any efforts with consolidation that we can legally push back on to stop the consolidation efforts?
That issue I'm less familiar with, and I think a lot of that is, legal questions, which I just want to be very clear, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a mapper. I saw that Mike Kreloff is on the call on this Zoom, and so you may have others that may want to chime in and answer some of the more legal technical questions.
Yeah, I know Heather Ware-Vaught is on as well, who's done a ton of election protection with the Democratic Party as well with Kreloff, and I think I even saw Ed Mullen over the years. And apologies if I'm skipping past any of you JDs out there. But oftentimes what you'll see once a precinct, in Chicago, there's consolidated precincts all over the place, right? Not every single one like it is out in the suburbs or downstate has their own voting location on election day on that end. What you often see then, and that always needs to be looked at, with a very keen eye, is who are they consolidating, right? Not all consolidations are, deemed equal. If there's particularly a group in a population that all of a sudden now is going to be put in a very far, distance and accessibility to their election day precinct, that can really affect, the voter turnout and the enfranchisement of those voters. And oftentimes in areas that might not be so democratically aligned, they'll use that power. And we see that happening, frankly, now that there's consolidation of, election day voting locations in states that are absolutely trying to restrict the vote. And so thankfully in Illinois, with some good voter protection laws and active party and voter protection team every cycle, those issues are identified. And because of the grassroots nature of the chairs, they can be, quickly prioritized. And there's a good success and good history of the party fighting those types of consolidations. I would also argue at the same time, this is a big lens that's always being brought into how and where the state revisits its voting laws. And when we are talking about expanding, rightfully so, like we just did, I think out of the House today, the permanent drop-off boxes and curbside voting, which is a great thing that was done because of the pandemic, but was so successful and secure and popular that it's going to be around full time. Even as we extend early voting options and opportunities, that we are not taking away, same day and election day opportunities for communities that may prioritize, frankly, not trusting the mail or the system, but going and seeing that ballot being cast themselves. So that's a role, frankly, that you as a party leader at a local level play a very significant part in making sure that there's knowledge and elevation of that issue if and when you're seeing that happen.
So, and as Zach kind of touched on, and I'll reiterate, the County Chairs Association is a grassroots organization. And if you feel as a committee person or as a county chair that there is an issue that is violating a voter's right, ability to exercise their right to vote, you need to get a hold of us so that we can engage the statewide voter protection team and we can help, because we know Republicans are doing it. They are trying to suppress votes, especially in central and southern Illinois. So the more we know on this, the more we can respond and be helpful. So we're starting to get more questions in on the census deadlines. So why don't we kind of, I know we talked a lot about the maps, but why don't we talk a little bit about what we're seeing then as far as the next couple of months with the census data and how that process is going to play out. We know counties are supposed to have their maps done by, I think, the first meeting in July, but then we have other maps that still have to be done. Where's that all looking, or at least what are we hearing so far?
So we're in an unprecedented situation. This has never happened in the history of this country where the census data is so delayed. I would make distinctions between constitutional requirements and kind of legislative requirements, right? So the Illinois Constitution requires that you draw a map by June 30th. It does not say specifically that you have to use decennial census data to draw the map. And so what I would urge people to do, again, there is no legal precedent for this, but I would urge people to draw maps with the best data that you have available, which is either the 2010 census data or the 2019 American Community Survey data. You all can decide. I haven't heard any strong opinions between the two yet, to draw the best map that you can under the constitutional deadline. When the census data comes out, in September or October, you may have the opportunity to adjust your maps, but to meet the constitutional requirement of June 30th, you should be drawing maps now and going through the process as you normally would. And again, decide which data source you think is the best source, the 2010 census, or sorry, yeah, the 2010 census or the 2019 ACS. But I would not mess with that deadline because that is the part that is written into the Constitution.
So we did get a couple other questions. We have one that's an interesting take, and I think Josina, you touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to get your further take on this. Some counties are looking at using just a GIS system to draw their map because it's, quote unquote, it's science doing it, and it's not going to be influenced then by either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. Is that an advisable option that county boards and our county parties should be advocating for?
So I would say GIS is a software. It doesn't draw the map for you. There is still a person drawing the map. And so it's up to you whether you think giving the power of drawing a map to whoever is your GIS guy is the right thing to do, or you as people who are elected by your constituents should be the ones having, say over the map. I cannot emphasize more. There is no such thing as an objective map. There is no such thing as quote unquote a fair map. There are maps that are more representative of the communities, partisan wise, demographically. There are maps that try to keep certain communities together, whether they be municipalities or communities of interest. There are so many different factors that can go into drawing a map. There is no one way to draw a map. So the idea that your GIS guy in the back room is going to draw the ideal map or this like magical, like fair map is just not a real thing, right? Again, he or she is a human being who will have their own biases as to what factors to draw the map around. They may just think that circles and squares makes it look more fair. That could cut into a lot of voting rights districts. It can cut into cutting municipalities, and you have to decide as elected officials, just like you make decisions about legislation, you have to make decisions about what you think should go into the map. And so I would really caution against the idea that this person who has software ability should be doing something this important without guidance from those who are elected to represent the people who are going to be most impacted by this map.
Okay. We had another question come in, and if you can give us a little bit of a deeper dive on this, Josina. You had said earlier that it's illegal for when you do mapping to pack and crack communities of color, but not Democrats or Republicans, based on partisan lines. Can you explain a little bit more of why it's illegal on for the racial side, but not partisan?
So again, the Voting Rights Act says that if you can draw effective majority minority districts, that you have to. So when you pack or you crack those different examples where you could draw 3 effective Black districts in that example, and you don't draw 3, if you draw 1 or you draw none, you're in violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And if you can prove through a map that you could have drawn more effective majority Black or Latino districts and you didn't, that is grounds to strike down a map. And that's what we've seen as the most common way that a map is struck down in court, is because it's in violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act. There are situations where partisan gerrymandering is illegal, but if we look kind of at all of the different cases, just because a map didn't draw the maximum number of Republican or Democratic districts or whatever they consider to be the partisan balance is not in and of itself grounds to strike down a map the way that voting rights is. There has to be a significant amount of documentation of intent and other different, much more technical legal things, to the extent where it's almost never done. I mean, Mike and Ed or somebody else on the call who are lawyers may be able to cite examples where partisan gerrymandering was used to strike down a map, but it is much harder to prove, and it is much less common to be used as grounds to strike down a map. I would say in that context that as you all are talking about the map, you should not be emailing or putting things in writing saying that your intent is to destroy Republicans with the map or anything like that, because that is the kind of evidence that could be used to prove intent. Again, we are trying to draw the most representative maps. And again, partisanship can be a factor. That is a legal factor. But again, voting rights is the most clear-cut way that you can be in violation and struck down in court, where partisan gerrymandering is much more complicated, much harder to prove, and much less effective way to strike down a map.
Okay. And everyone, we're coming up on an hour, so I want us to start wrapping up here in a little bit, but we've got some still got some questions coming in. Zach, I wanted to pick your brain on this. So in some of our counties where the Republicans control the county board, and in years past, they've just run roughshod, here's the map, take it or leave it. What options do we have politically that we can exercise, from a county party perspective or from a committee person perspective? What can we do politically to at least make our voices heard in those Republican controlled counties?
Sure. And I just want to apologize at the outset. Oh, well, he's sleeping now. But the state's newest Democrat, all of 8 weeks old, just joined me here, but he's snoozing. So that's a good question. And I know for a lot of you downstate in some of these more rural and smaller counties, that's the experience that you've got and that is likely facing you down. So one, I think you can always call out on the process. That's what Republicans are going to do at the state and federal level. You already saw it today. They were criticizing the way by which Democrats at the state legislature are holding hearings and gathering public input on what the map and the mapping process will look like in Illinois. If they are not engaging in public meetings, if they are not giving advance notice of how and where the public can see their approach and their process by this, that's a legitimate criticism that you can lodge, and frankly call it the hypocrisy in it. That they're gonna scream bloody murder down in Springfield, but have no issue about doing it at the courthouse. Additionally, for those that are in communities, and I know particularly there are some downstate counties that have fairly concentrated and not small minority populations, you may very well have an ability to bring a voting rights amendment challenge to this. Because again, if the Republicans that are in control are going to as Josina had mentioned, go about trying to dilute that type of community and split it apart rather than into one that may or may not create a more competitive or democratic district, but into three, so that that community that otherwise is fairly compact and similar is now diluted amongst multiple jurisdictions. That's a challenge certainly worth having, not only just on the merits, but certainly on the political aspect to it. And what we, Josina and I, have offered to discuss with the chairs and some of the county parties is to say, listen, you may be in the minority on a partisan sense on your county board, but if you can draw a map that you think would best represent, particularly with voting rights amendment consideration, that is a tool worth having and an experience and an opportunity to make an argument that you might not be able to or couldn't otherwise, to bring to those public hearings and to bring to community leaders and members that would be negatively impacted from this and say, listen, this is happening, and they're doing it what we think could be under the guise of a violation of the VRA, but they're just saying that they might not know any better. Well, we would. And so you can go about engaging with Josina and myself and drawing that map, working with us to talk through how to make that case effectively, and to do so, hopefully maybe not to change all the maps and districts, but a couple of them that otherwise might be really negatively impacted in that regard.
Okay. So we've got one more question, and I think we're going to wrap up on this one, but I think it's a multi-level one on this. So let's say the Republicans in a central or even a northern Illinois county or central or southern Illinois county put a map in and they pass it, and the map itself violates the Voting Rights Act. What are our next steps? How do we go about, filing a complaint? And then if it goes through the litigation process and the courts strike down a Republican map that violates the VRA, what then happens when we're supposed to be passing petitions in September? What does that look like then going into the fall with our county board maps? What is that process?
I think that might be a Mike Kreloff or a Ed Mullen question.
Okay.
I mean, you definitely hire a Mike Kreloff or Ed Mullen or somebody like that. One to file the voting rights challenge to the map. And part of what you need in order to file that challenge is an actual map that shows that you can draw more effective majority minority districts. You can't just assert it, and you can't just take demographics and divide it by the number of districts, because that's not how mapping works, right? That you need density to draw districts. Like I always say, Asian Americans are 7% of the state, and we're so dispersed that you can't just take that 7% and put them all in one district. So you do need to have a map that shows evidence that you can draw an effective majority minority district, and then you mount a legal challenge depending on the timing. And Mike and Ed can talk to this, what happens to the map and what happens to the election.
Yeah, and that legal aspect is something that, again, I think the county chairs is uniquely qualified and willing to help with, to connect you with those legal experts, and then hopefully have some backing from Josina on what that map will provide then as a standing to bring that legal challenge. It's good to have it at the outset so that you know what it looks like, if it's not going that way.
Ed put something in the chat. And again, I would also just add that that's where having public hearings where you can utilize, if we draw a map that says you can draw X number of voting rights districts and you put that into the record through public hearing, you're basically putting the Republicans on notice that if they don't draw a map that meets that number of effective voting rights districts, that the map will be struck down. And it is actually incredibly powerful tool because they don't want the map to be struck down, because if it gets struck down, they may not be able to redraw it themselves. The court could redraw it. There's lots of different hypotheticals of who could end up redrawing the map that would not draw nearly as advantageous of a map for them. So it's a very big stick.
Okay, and that's something the County Chairs Association is looking for ways that we can provide more of those resources. And I know I dropped in the chat as we were going throughout, we are looking to make a substantial investment to help our county parties, to help our county boards with this process. And if there's any way you can help out with that, please be generous. We'd appreciate it. This only happens once every 10 years, so we want to make sure that we're being able as helpful as we can and providing the resources that we can. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap everything up. It looks like our President Zohoreck has jumped off. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. We will be sharing the presentation on afterwards. We will have the video posted to YouTube as well. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please let us know. Make sure you're also liking us on social media, checking out our website, and following us so that you're getting the most updated information on the County Chairs Association. So
and please do not share the presentation across to your government.
Yes, we will follow up with the legal disclaimers like Josina was talking about when we send everything out. So again, thank you everyone and have a good evening.
Stay safe.